I didn't do it alone, but I've been tinkering on this project for a long time. When I was in China, I was writing a different book, but by the time I was in Paris, I was starting to develop it. And at some point, I got a grant from the Canada Art Council to help support me as I wrote it, as well as to pay a bunch of editors. So I hired something like 15 editors to help me work on the project, and they were, the best writers that I knew. And I had to, yeah, learn a new craft completely. And I think people transitioning from the military into any creative art, but particularly writing, need to go in and put in their time, spend the times in the writing workshops, read the books, go back to school, do all of the things. I've been editing this literary magazine called The Wrath-Bearing Tree, which is all more mostly for veterans who are trying to get into creative writing as an outlet and as expression, but it's often it's getting quite legitimate and the pieces are quite strong. So this has been a good place for me to try to help people go down the path that I've gone down, because I think when you can tell your story or tell any story or pull your shadows out of your own brain and line them up in a way that makes sense, you are basically helping your mental health. I think it's an important path for writers to go down and for veterans to go down, to just be well. I also think it's a story that matters. And when, the Canadian government sends soldiers off to do awful things in war and they come home broken, that wound isn't just an individual wound, it's a national wound. So I've been trying to write this story, or I wrote this story not for myself and for my own ego. I tried as much as possible to write it for the veterans, for all of us, the ones who never came home, people who were lost, people who don't have a voice.
Everybody, welcome back to the Living the Next Chapter podcast, and I get to have somebody on my screen from my part of the world, but not here currently, somewhere else, which is a place I've never been, but I'd love to go. Matt is here. We're going to talk about his book. Some big things happening on his book online. It's getting some attractions, getting some people looking at it, and you need to check it out as well. Matt, welcome to the podcast. Nice to have you here on Living the Next Chapter.
Thanks very much for having me here today, Dave. If you ever find yourself in Paris, I will be your cheese guide.
Oh, everybody needs a cheese guide. That sounds great.
I'll draw you the cheese map of Paris.
In slices?
Well, it's probably not going to be good advice to follow if you're lactose intolerant.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Do they have the cheese slices with, like, in the wrap, like you make grilled cheese with there too? No.
That's
not cheese.
That's considered an abomination in France.
That's plastic.
Once America absorbs our beautiful country, that may be the only cheese we have left.
There you go. There you go. Right? Okay, so let everybody know where you're originally from, born, and where you are today.
Okay, I was born in Burlington, Ontario, right down the street.
Yay!
And then I spent most of my early youth in Kingston, Ontario, Canada, where I went to school and eventually Queens. And then I joined the military, served on both coasts, drove ships in Halifax, drove ships out of Victoria, and eventually settled into Ottawa, where I lived for another 6 or 7 years. Eventually deployed to Afghanistan, served there for a year. Came back home, a little bit more Ottawa. I lived in Nicaragua for about 6 months. I taught in China for about a year. And I've spent about the last 8 years living in Paris, being a writer, nerd, and bohemian.
Nice. Do you miss Burlington, Ontario?
Burlington, Ontario, I have just little memories from.
Just little.
I don't strongly associate with Burlington, Ontario.
Okay.
But Kingston, I still have family in Kingston, and
nice.
I think about it more often. And Ottawa, truly, between those two towns, is some kind of a shared home. I also went back to school in Ottawa and took a master's at some point, and I've got a whole bunch of poet nerds and military buddies out there. So being abroad has been tough for holding on to those friendships, basically.
Yeah.
But I feel a little consoled today Because as I shared with you moments ago, for one
Yes.
glittering window, my book, Predators, Reapers, and Deadlier Creatures, is number one in Canada, which is the ridiculous thing to come out of my mouth after years of quiet grinding.
Wow. And that just happened today.
I think today and yesterday it's
And
to
yesterday?
this
Wow.
special category. I've been reading and admiring Margaret Atwood for years, and today I'm like, oh my God, I very, very, very briefly sold more books than Margaret Atwood. I also see 15 Dogs on this list, which I recently read, and it was a beautiful work of art. I could probably
Wow.
spend the whole interview just talking about how much I enjoyed that book, but it's not really the purpose why we're here.
Well, top of the charts, that's got to be a nice feeling, right? For you as an author.
It apparently, if you don't create a little promotional team to help you pitch your book in the first few weeks and or days that it arrives, and the algorithm won't pick up your book and the whole thing will just kind of fizzle and disappear and all of the labor that you put into it will kind of, it will be as if it never existed. And for me, since it also included going to war and serving in war and grieving the war and coming home from the war, and uh, I was just not willing to let it go without some kind of fight. Yeah, I mean, I guess the whole thing about going to war and being a veteran is you kind of take a little piece of war home with you.
And that war, particularly, I've had many people who have served, Canadians who have served in Afghanistan, and some of the stories that have come back through conversations, I don't think anybody can really understand fully what it was like to serve during that time and what was asked of you and others that served. Just it was an amazing time, and to see where we've gone now after the fact and all the effort and what it's turned into, it's very sobering.
It was a very shocking moment a few summers ago when the US pulled out the troops and Afghanistan reverted to the Taliban in a matter of days. And you could feel this kind of wave of grief from everyone who served over there as all of the efforts and sacrifices and friends we lost and blood we spilled just kind of evaporated into this great sense of loss and waste, which I think is the proper way to approach writing about war. People who write about war in a muscular, jingoistic way, yay, yay, rar, war, I think end up making something false and untrue. I think it's difficult to write about it in a way that doesn't express that waste. And then, again, I don't know if you even want me to go here, but this recent situation about the pressure on Canada, and this connects to my service in a very disturbing way. These threats of having our sovereignty not respected and being annexed and stuff like that. It's like I didn't go to serve an ally, to serve with allies in the Afghanistan war, to then later have my service forgotten in some, blink of an eye.
Yeah, erased, like completely, like it never happened, right? And I'm like, come on. And the fact that our men and women serve with our allies, shoulder to shoulder, elbow to elbow, in the same situations and in supporting each other, and then to feel this uncertainty that's happening in the world right now feels. The timing of your book is interesting. That's what I'm trying to get to, is that it's just the fact that it's now and it's out there. People are falling in love with it. It's just the timing of it, I don't think could have been planned any better.
I mean, it's literally a story about a Canadian serving in in an American war. And it's a story about drone warfare in a time where we've got our man Elon Musk tearing away governmental restraints on new technologies. And I'm here saying, oh, we've got this horrifying dystopian technology in the form of the unarmed drone, which we could either find some ethical restraints for or some other type of restraints for in a time where these very protections are disappearing. So, yeah, I think this is a moment in which the book happens to be in on the zeitgeist, perhaps uniquely.
Was this the first thing you've written like this?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
The path to publication has been a convoluted one. Published prose, I've published poetry, I've published creative nonfiction, I've published chapbooks, I've written 3 other books, correction, 2 other books. This one was the one that got picked up. So there's this fantasy that because it's my first book, it's like I've never done any of this before, that I'm suddenly new game, but I've had to push through many obstacles to get here. It's weird being kind of in my own little circles, one of the long in the tooth writers. And yet, in terms of the public eye and the people who are reacting to the book, it's like, oh, Matt's brand new. I'm just gonna eat that. My ego can handle this. I'll be born again as many times as required.
It's the overnight success that took years to get, right?
If we can even call it a success at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll take my tiny victory over Margaret Atwood as the great success of my life. I'm going to print out that photo of me slightly above her in sales for one day, put it on my wall. But at the end of the day, I do have massive respect for one of the great matriarchs of literature.
It's amazing.
That's my cat jumping in on the Zoom.
I love it. Always a good time to have a cat drop by. That's good.
Do you want a little teaser of this?
Let's do the teaser. Let's go.
Okay. Should I say trigger warning when it's obviously a war story?
Yes.
Trigger warning. It's a war story.
Trigger. Thank you.
Okay. Serious face. I'd been in Afghanistan for 3 months when I saw the woman in the marketplace die. 30 or 40 men haggled the price of fruit as she skirted a low stone wall in her burqa, stomach swollen in late pregnancy. Our drone was hovering overhead, studying the pattern of life, when the woman triggered the bomb, which exploded in a white flash. The screen dimmed. We saw her legs had been severed nearly at the hip. Commotion. The men in the market scrambled to aid her, pouring water in her mouth, and we sent a helicopter, which landed in the marketplace a few minutes later. The men formed a protective circle around the dying woman. When the medics climbed from the chopper with their kits and stretchers, the villagers didn't let them get close. Minutes passed. The medics arguing with the villagers as the woman's mouth stretched into a black O and blood seeped into the sand, and we sipped coffee and cracked cruel jokes until she died. And I didn't even want to go here, because you can't make sense of the stupid, awful waste of it no matter how you try. But back then, I hadn't yet grown wise. After my shift, I stumbled back to the barracks in the pre-dawn fog and sat on the steps outside in the rear of the building to be alone. I heard a whimper, a muted cough. Pulled a little sailor's flashlight from my pocket, spun around and poked my head under the steps. A black cavity yawned, more than large enough for a person to crawl into the building's underbelly. I inched forward, flashlight piercing the darkness, and discovered the Bigfoot. On closer inspection, this was not a military-issued Bigfoot. It had wormed its way into the corner beneath the shower room where the floor got soggy and sagged. Shining my little light up and down its hulking body, dozens of greasy frogs hopped deeper into darkness. The creature huddled next to a drain pipe, where marks in the fungi suggested it had been slurping the nourishing scum. At first I had no idea what I was seeing. A bulkish white man shape snuffling in the dirt, enormous hands pressed over its brow like the light was a welding torch, thick fur tufts, filthy and matted with sweat and frog oil, some kind of tremendous gorilla bear, eyes glittering with intelligence, whimpering and seeming to mouth language. What other word but Bigfoot applies? A flashlight nearly slipped in my sweaty palm. A voice in my head told me to run far away, sprint all the way back to Canada. Another voice said, "Get your pistol out, fool," and I complied, pulling my rusty 9mm from the holster and flicking off the safety. The creature, seated in the cellar's muck, peeked at me through its fingers, big pooling blue eyes, fuzzy eyebrows furrowing low, 2 great canine tusks jutting over a wolf-like muzzle. It groveled, the saddest Bigfoot I'd ever seen, but also the happiest since it was my first. I tried to keep my voice steady, but it cracked anyway. "Are you with the Taliban?" To my surprise, it responded in a twangy English with a voice deeper than a bear's. "Man, I ain't with anything except 100 frogs and about 4,000 fleas." "Well, you're obviously not from around here." I was looking at his thick fur, orange and matted with patches of white freckled skin peeking out. Summer in Kandahar, the heat rises halfway to boiling and just a bit cooler at night. How the hell did you get onto the base? The Bigfoot hung its heavy head and sighed. Took a nap on the wrong plane. It picked at a few rags that clung to its shoulders that might once have been a woolen scarf. I know you got a job to do, but please don't shoot me. Please. He closed his eyes, waiting for the bullet, and clasped his hairy-knuckled hands. I know how I look, but I never wanted to hurt nobody. His lower lip trembled. It could not know that it was pleading for mercy from a drone operator, that in the last month I had seen 11 people killed by missiles and bombs. I hadn't ordered any of the strikes, but I had facilitated each one by lining up assets and passing information. If I hadn't seen that woman die in the marketplace, I would have wasted the freak. But watching, without being able to do anything, had been the absolute worst feeling, like a fabric in the chest tearing. Here was a living creature who needed my help, and a chance to prove to myself I was still capable of a good deed. I took a whole sleeve of saltine crackers, which my mother had sent me in a morale box, and slid it and 2 bottles of water into the crack at the back of the barracks, where his eyes glittered in the dark. I felt for him, the big bastard. He was hot in his pelt and chomping the heads off frogs. Don't let anyone else hear you crying, I said. I can't protect you. Avoid discovery. Preserve water. The Bigfoot nodded its huge head in thanks. I made a promise to tell this story, even if it hurts. There will be drone strikes, monsters, barbed wire, and forbidden love in bunkers. Once I was a giant, but now I sit in the wake of strength with the cripples. I have taken innocent life and nearly destroyed myself in grief. But the story starts with a kindness, and that matters.
Please tell me there's an audiobook for this.
You know, I'm getting encouraged
Come on,
to do the
seriously.
That's the opener. That's
wow.
Para.
Come on.
I've been performing as a storyteller and a spoken word artist for like 10 years since I left the military. So it makes sense for me to do an audiobook. I just need to actually do it one step at a time.
I felt like I was underneath the building with you, like right beside you. My knees were wet. It kind of stunk under there. Like I'm like right beside you while you did that.
I'd say one of the things that this book tries to do is to consistently come from a place of being in the body, because ultimately we're constantly in our body. And the whole idea of trying to turn people into these like killing machines or these kill bots in the operations center is at some point you kind of divorce them from their bodies so that they can be just pure minds. And when you're divorced from your body, you're also divorced from your emotions. So there's this, Descartes' mind-body divide goes into its ultimate expression in this kind of war, where you're constantly denying the body. You're not allowed sexual relationships. You're not allowed touch of any sort, really. On the other hand, you are allowed to constantly rationalize and be a man robot. So I try to write from the body. There's also a weird and constant theme of bodybuilding in the book, because that was one of the escapes and one of the outlets from the war. And I've got an excerpt on that, but maybe I'll wait until if you've got any more questions to throw at me, because I just don't want to blab at you constantly,
No, I'm enjoying it. I'm loving it. And there's a reason why it's doing so well online. So congratulations for that. The whole thing about the drone warfare, I'm seeing clips on YouTube, and it looks like this sick video game where a drone is looking down on someone who is quote unquote the enemy, and they're pleading the drone to go somewhere else, or they're trying to hide, and like this whole new world of seeing things happen almost in real time from the comfort of our living room couch. It just desensitizes a little bit for people who don't understand what's really going on in the moment, and how fearful it would be for a human to be staring at this thing that's capable of ending them. Like, I don't understand how someone can just punch in, like yourself, punch your clock, go sit at your station, experience this through a screen, punch out, go back and be normal. I don't understand.
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, you're seeing right to the heart of the matter of why it's such a messed up type of conflict for a number of reasons. But the type that you're talking about, where the drone operator goes in the morning, does the dirty business all day, and then goes back to their families in the evening, I think that's one of the most mentally injurious things we can put humans through, is to put them into that position so they have to basically disassociate from themselves and create a second life and a second personality. And then, sorry, I can't talk about my work, darling. I had a friend who did that kind of war, and she had a really hard time, and her marriage eventually fell apart. And I'm assuming everyone who, for me at least, it was like, you go to war, you're in Afghanistan, you're doing this work, but you're still like in the war. We were getting regularly rocketed. You're kind of in this really austere living condition, and you had to leave and go away. And coming back, there's like a decompression and some mental health briefings and stuff, so you could have that separation between wartime and peacetime. Trying to take away that separation between wartime and peacetime, I think, is quite messed up. You were also talking about, the drones looking at people and they're pleading, please don't kill me. I've seen videos of, there's a bunch of cars moving together, and you hear the drone operators talking, and they're like, look at them there, Taliban, going on about their day. They're gonna go blow up some of my guys there. Yep, you can just smell how much they want to kill our guys, and you just hear them. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but you can hear they've already made up their minds about what they're seeing. So they shoot the missile, they blow up the lead car. They shoot the missile, they blow up the rear car, trapping the two middle cars in classic strategy, and the two middle cars jump out. They start waving white cloths. It's a wedding. The bride is dead. The groom is dead. I'm laughing. Half of the guests survive. I'm laughing because this is my coping strategy. And part of the problem is that there was this culture of killing in which everyone they looked at was an enemy. And my question the book asks is, how do you keep the humanity in this equation? I'm leaping. They've delegated target selection now largely in different areas to actual AI. It was always a dodgy science to figure out who are we going to shoot with the drone, because there's like the kind of responsive war fighting that I did with drones is like, oh my God, the guys are in contact, send the drone. But then there's like, okay, we know there's a bunch of insurgents in this area and they're collaborating. Who's been talking to who do we target? So that figuring out that intelligence puzzle of like, who are the bad guys, they now, in certain places, including Israel, they've just like kind of given that to certain AI. And the AI will just kind of give you the kill list. And then you plug that into the drones and you say, go, here's the house, hit the house. It's so ominous. And if you can look into a crystal ball and see the future, which is obviously my power, and you put together the automated drone with the automated target selection technologies, and suddenly it's just an absolute dystopia. No one's actually free or safe ever again. And that's me being fearful and seeing, the fate of the technology completely unfettered. I think our imaginations can probably provide multiple dystopias that we're moving towards right now.
How does the book then fit into that narrative then? Like, how does this go hand in hand?
For the narrative of moving towards dystopia, I think you might read my book or hear me talk and think his belief in the human species is quite low. This, I think, is a normal position that a lot of veterans have after war. They come in, they've seen some darkness and can't quite believe as innocently and as naively as they did. But I remain naive in believing in art. I remain naive in believing that people are smart enough to understand a satire and to some degree anticipate the things that they don't want and try to move away from them. The writing of the book itself, I think, is hopeful. I also believe in veterans. I believed in the veterans that I served with, including the American veterans that I served with. I think that there's an immense amount of leadership there in a pool. And I think that people in the US sorely need that leadership right now. And they need to actually have some sense spoken to them. And we need to be able to tell good from bad again. We need to be able to tell friend from foe again. We need to be able to tell right and wrong. And we seem to have lost a lot of this power recently.
One thing I'm hearing from guests that have been on the show that I've served is that they'll say things like war is a constant companion that travels with me back home. And there's times where the companion is obvious, and there's times when the companion is silent, but the companion is always there. And I'm like, that's an interesting thing to think of, a companion walking with you, and you bring that home with you. What kind of your experience coming out of that and coming back home? What was your journey then?
I think everyone's going to have a bit of a different experience. I think, though, the people who are kind of the most emotionally shut down in the war, or perhaps who believed in the rhetoric hard enough, or perhaps believed that what we were doing wasn't killing, that it was indeed a video game, and they kind of drank the Kool-Aid in order to make it easier. I think after the war, they then had to go and figure it out and grieve it. Because I look back on it and I seem to recall grieving the whole time. Although at some point I certainly went very, very numb. The people who went and kind of posthumously grieved the war, I think, have a harder time of it, and many of them break, and some of my friends aren't around anymore for that reason. I was walking down the street today because I was meeting some friends. I was actually meeting a mixed martial art fighter, and we're going to do an interview with him for this association I work with in Paris called Bodies of Work. We're going to interview him and ask him his ideas on the body and mental health and all these different things. And biking back, my girlfriend wanted to get some mangoes, and it was a very busy street with a lot of people bustling past. And her suggestion, let's get some mangoes here. My body reacted with this like tsunami of stress because it was so packed and busy. I was like, if I go into that busy store, I might end up hurting someone with a mango or other fruit. And in that way, the war hasn't left. Mind you, if there's an actual crisis, I feel like I just flip into this hyper cold, hyper rational decision making crisis management mode. But a non crisis, like a busy store, I find almost paralyzing. There's the war in that way, which is like a teleportation magic where you're just back into it in your body. But I think more significantly, you carry the war within. So it's also of the time and of the age, because I'm 42 now. So most dudes, when they hit 40, are like, maybe I should get some therapy. I just think,
Right.
I just think for a veteran, it's a bit like more urgent.
Yeah.
And the journey within needs to take place, and some kind of attempt to find peace within is also the goal. That's a work in progress.
Can you share more from the book?
I would love to share more from the book.
I would love to hear more.
Okay. I talked a little bit about the bodybuilding aspect, which is kind of short.
Yeah.
But I've also got one of the more ethical moments, soldier on soldier talk. Jump in on the bodybuilding, and if you want another excerpt, we can go into the soldier.
Okay.
All
right.
See what happens.
I'm with you.
You know, if you don't like it, just edit it later. Okay. Wave your editorial wand. Every afternoon after waking, I walked down the hall and rapped on the door of my weightlifting partner. Tic Tac was my coach, and he was also a douchebag, so I called him the coach bag. He cracked the door with his pecs dancing, 6.5 feet tall, with his head newly shaven, and every inch of exposed skin crawling with veins, even his face. I met him early in the tour when I was bench pressing 265 and got stuck with the bar in the air 3 inches above my chest. I strained against it, threw my back into it, but the barbell kept sinking until it was a hair away from my nipples, and I squealed like a trapped hog. Calloused ogre palms appeared, pulled the bar upwards, but gently, so gently, Only enough pressure to get me through the sticking point, and then I was abandoned to heave and grunt the full weight the rest of the way. I searched the whole gym for the Prince Charming who gave me the perfect spot, staring obliquely at Soldier's hands until I found his particularly grizzled set of meat hooks, and our friendship formed. He was a jokester, a prankster, a Canadian who inherited his parents' accent. Homeschooled, he said, and would explain no further. A few quick steps across the hard-packed sand, past the queue at Tim Hortons, and we arrived in a world of clanking steel, a soldier's gym. Rusty weights, dozens of machines, neat rows of dumbbells, and the stink of iron, swass, and musty towels. The gym bunker was the size of a mid-range cathedral with a concave ceiling, dumbbell racks instead of pews, a wall of mirrors instead of stained glass, and in place of an altar, the leg press machine. I don't have a sacred bone in my body, but the gym was holy. The clanks, thuds, grunts, whirs, squeaks, and the rest of the music. The incense of crusted sweat and sprayed testosterone. Sometimes I would think about the weights even when I wasn't in the gym. The potential energy of them, their efficacy as missiles, their patience. The purpose of weight is to wait. The way they were stowed systematically in rows, like sailors on ships. The fact that they remained cold, even in the heat. The rust, the salt, the smell of iron, the taste of chalk. Arriving in the gym, Tic-Tac's critique of the soldiers' physiques began as we warmed up. Now check out said triceps on that one, he observed, pointing a veiny finger. For a man of his musculature, Tic-Tac's voice was surprisingly high-pitched. Do you think he cries when he looks in mirror? I mean, the fitness journey and the bodybuilding, it's like inextricable from the mental health journey, you know? And if you're too much of a testosterone poisoned idiot to go to therapy and do the kind of emotional or mental work that's required to be whole, you always have this option. So, I mean, when I wasn't at work on shift, we were living in the gym. It just makes sense to keep it going. I tell my students now, because I teach rhetoric, creative writing, I'm like, don't try to live your life hopping on one leg and pretend like you're just some intellect, your body is just an excuse to carry your brain from class to class. Try to be like a complete mind body person. Run with both legs. You want another teaser?
I want another teaser.
I love giving.
I want another teaser. I'm in.
Okay. Apologies, Major, said Bell. If I have said anything to offend, I am deeply sorry. He raised his voice so the other soldiers, 12 sitting in the peripheral desks, could hear. I was just guiding this young sailor through an important army rite of passage. He winked at Crazy J, who laughed and immediately hid his face behind a stack of papers. Somehow, the Major's steel rod of a spine stiffened by another few degrees. She marched to the front of the room, where she could make eye contact with each of us, where her voice could travel to the corners. Then she waited for absolute silence, for our complete attention, for 30 long seconds, where we could do nothing but stare at her, stare at the few blonde hairs that escaped the helmet she often wore. Eyes like the turquoise runoff of glaciers, coffee cup in her hand with a little steam. Somewhere buried in that unflattering sack of her uniform was her body, soft curves and hard muscle. Dear God, it drove us into a froth. But all we could see of it was a triangle of pale skin exposed at her throat. Finally, she spoke in a clear, calm voice. Gentlemen, I'm a busy woman. I don't appreciate having to go over the same lessons over and over again. She glared at Belle, who barely suppressed a whimper. Quite a few of you think the way Belle does, that killing a person, like getting laid, is a rite of manliness. Your ignorance makes me want to puke. She sipped from her bucket of coffee. Thinking that having sex will make you a man is just normal idiocy. But this idea that killing makes you a man, that's perverted. She set down her coffee and effortlessly leaped onto the waist-high map in the center of the room. It was an eclipse of hotness. None of us could turn our heads, and I caught the scent of vanilla. Behind her, half a dozen drone feeds spooled. Do you really think that killing is sex? She asked. Maybe you've been doing it wrong. And she laughed at us, a high-pitched and cruel tinkle, suitable for a cocktail party. Blood rushed into my face. Killing is not sex, troops. Killing is a necessary part of the job, but it isn't a pleasure. We move deliberately with our highest integrity. Do you understand? Bell opened his mouth, but the major waved an imperious hand. Shut up, Bell. Unless you want to spend the rest of your tour with that mop in your hands. From now on, every target we watch for the drones gets a human name. And you will call them by their human names, and that's how we will discuss them. Bell, Crazy J, and a few others groaned at this. Mutters of hippie bull and candy ass. Killing is not sex, she repeated. Killing must be difficult. If this is hard for you to understand, figure it out. With that, she hopped off the map table and disappeared into her nook at the back of the operations center. Each of us was mere rope in a tug-of-war between giants. On one hand, we had the Major, who wanted ethical warriors. On the other hand, something about the bureaucracy, the distance of the drones, the general, Bell, the way none of it seemed real, and the army culture itself, all pressured us to become killbots.
Okay, I gotta know, how long did it take you to write this? Because you're putting me in the room. Like, I just love. I love you reading it to me. This again, audiobook. Come on, but B, I love being in the room with you. How long did this take to pull this together?
I didn't do it alone, but I've been tinkering on this project for a long time. When I was in China, I was writing a different book, but by the time I was in Paris, I was starting to develop it. And at some point, I got a grant from the Canada Art Council to help support me as I wrote it, as well as to pay a bunch of editors. So I hired something like 15 editors to help me work on the project, and they were, the best writers that I knew. And I had to, learn a new craft completely. And I think people transitioning from the military into any creative art, but particularly writing, need to go in and put in their time, spend the times in the writing workshops, read the books, go back to school, do all of the things. I've been editing this literary magazine called The Wrath-Bearing Tree, which is all more mostly for veterans who are trying to get into creative writing as an outlet and as expression, but it's often it's getting quite legitimate and the pieces are quite strong. So this has been a good place for me to try to help people go down the path that I've gone down, because I think when you can tell your story or tell any story or pull your shadows out of your own brain and line them up in a way that makes sense, you are basically helping your mental health. I think it's an important path for writers to go down and for veterans to go down, to just be well. I also think it's a story that matters. And when, the Canadian government sends soldiers off to do awful things in war and they come home broken, that wound isn't just an individual wound, it's a national wound. So I've been trying to write this story, or I wrote this story not for myself and for my own ego. I tried as much as possible to write it for the veterans, for all of us, the ones who never came home, people who were lost, people who don't have a voice.
I think when we think the term veteran, we think of November 11th, we think of Remembrance Day, we think of poppies, we think of a bunch of, dwindling numbers now over time, but gray hair, lots of awards and badges and everything on their uniform. We don't think of somebody in their 40s. We don't think of somebody in their 20s and their 30s coming back from these situations. We just kind of put everybody in a bucket, kind of going, well, veterans are older people. But no.
I think in Canada, perhaps until recently, we liked to pretend that war was a distant thing. And we're a very progressive country. And we don't like the idea that our hands are dirty. We don't like the idea of getting our hands more dirty. And I think in some ways we've kind of denied the military, denied our military history, denied our veterans. And the time for that has passed. And we will find a new pride in our own in the fierceness of the wolves that we need. We'll have our own wolves because the rest of the world certainly does. And currently Canada is sandwiched between, a newly aggressive US and the ancient enemy of Russia. We have a massive country to protect. And a little known fact in the rest of the world is how fiercely proud we are.
That history, the ability to walk proudly in different countries and be welcomed and loved by some countries that other countries would not accept other people traveling, to have that Canadian flag sewn on your backpack, that kind of thing, right? I think as someone who I really love using this podcast to support veterans and their stories. I just think it's something that's really needed.
I feel like Canada is willing to take accountability as well for its mistakes. I think Canada is a country that tries to learn and try to do better. We've seen the way we've kind of come together to collectively grieve the residential schools situation. Right. And I don't think many countries are on board and doing that kind of healing work. I think it's the same in relationship. And countries are the same. And businesses are the same. But there's this idea, if you get too powerful, you start to think like a psychopath, and you no longer have to take accountability for your actions. But Canada, in its way, remains fiercely proud, but also fiercely humble. And that's one of the reasons I believe in it.
Where do you go from here yourself?
Where do I go? I try to lift this book off the ground and get it in front of as many people as possible, particularly the veterans. And the feedback I'm getting so far has already been really inspiring, because they're moved and they're challenged, and they may not agree with everything I say, but they agree that what I'm saying is in its way true. I want to push it. I want people to experience it. I don't care about making a bunch of money. I don't care about ever being famous. I don't need to prove how resilient I am or how smart I am. I just want the message to go out and for people to read stuff like that excerpt about, now we will give our targets human names. I want everyone in any military in the world to go and have a think about giving their targets human names and what that means, and to go through my little maze of dehumanization that I've made in this proof of humanity that I've written. I just feel like the book matters, and I'm going to inject as much life into it as I can before I eventually collapse into, I don't know, some kind of recovery coma. And then hopefully at the other end of the recovery coma, write a beautiful book on leadership. My experiences teaching at the École Militaire here in France, and trying to be a leader in artistic communities as a veteran with PTSD, and what kind of journey that's been. More lessons of life, lessons of love, and lessons of the body. So I would like to keep writing because it's my purpose.
I love it. Can you spoil us with one more? Something that we can wrap up with from the book? I know I'm asking a lot of you.
Well, I don't have it.
I'm enjoying it.
I don't have it pre-prepared. So while I'm searching, would you mind telling the audience that joke you know?
I won't tell them a joke I know because my jokes suck. But MatthewJamesJones.com is where you're going to go to get all the information, the blog, the publication, the readings, word gifts. What's word gifts? I got to click on that. Word gifts.
A word gift is a poem, basically, that I wrote to give to people. I just needed ways to promote my work, and I can also make poems. So it's just a little gifts, just little gifts.
Nice.
When you join the mailing list, you get a free word gift as well.
Come on.
Well, it's better to say, please click here and get a free word gift, than to go with your hat in your hands and say, please join my mailing list. Okay.
While you're picking out your story, I'm doing my sign up right now. So.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
I got it in there.
I was talking to this MMA fighter earlier, and he's like, every time I do a fight, I gain 1,000 followers on Instagram, maybe 2,000 followers. God, the ding of a new follower.
Ding.
And I was like, that's great. Every time I do a reading or I publish a piece, I'll get one. We just live in a completely different world. I've been building my tiny little lists and followers for like a decade. And this guy is just, it's a totally different game. Okay.
It's happening in real time. And that's why we do the podcast. I want people to connect with you. I want people to come support you and buy many copies of the books and take some and donate them to their local Legion and put them in the hands of a veteran. Like, come on, we can do that for you.
Want to jump into a war scene?
Yeah. Let's wrap up with that.
The third man disappeared into the poppies. Bell asked the major, aren't we going to finish the job? We've got 2 more missiles. The major spun to me. Jones, launch the medical helicopter. There's no time. You'll need to line up a second helo for the wounded insurgent, too. Aye, ma'am, I said. I yelled to Clay. Launch the first helo for the injured soldier. We need a second helicopter in the air immediately, with an armed escort. Bell whispered urgently, Major, you going to let him get away? Let's finish the job. Her glare was as vicious as her drone work. We have finished the job, Bell. How many times do I need to explain this to you? When the threat has been neutralized, the fight is over. Our soldiers have been protected. Now we will proceed with our highest integrity. Major, we can't call it heroism. First you blow the shit out of the guy, now you want to save his life? Update. Medical helicopter wheels up from Kandahar Airfield Surgical Hospital at minute 1928 en route to critically wounded Canadian soldier. The major turned to face Bell, but everyone was eavesdropping. Mom and Dad were fighting again. She strained for an extra inch of height. That's correct. As soon as he was injured, he became a non-combatant. And now he has useful intelligence that we can extract. This isn't the first time we've recovered a wounded insurgent. Why are we having this conversation? This guy was shooting at us 5 minutes ago. Now we have to spend millions of dollars healing him and guarding him as he tries to escape and sends info back to his terrorist bum chums. We can't let them bleed us. First helicopter's on his way, I reported. The second will fly soon. A military policeman is providing the escort from the wounded insurgent. In accordance with your recent direction, Major, I named the insurgent Hamid. Bell flinched. Jones, the Taliban are not your pets. I met the major's eye, and it softened for a second with gratitude. I think, to have someone in your corner, to not be completely alone. She had killed a man a minute ago, but I wanted her anyway. Maybe I wanted her more. I hadn't forgotten that I was a hulking brute who could barely run 3 miles, that she was a soccer champ in another life. But the loneliness monster is not a reasonable beast. Update. Medical helicopter wheels down at Kandahar Airfield Surgical Hospital at minute 1934 with critically wounded Canadian soldier. We all breathed a sigh of relief, and the tension melted like fog. The wounded Canadian soldier was out of our hands. Nothing we could do to help him more. We'd moved swiftly and defended our people. We made difficult choices with limited time and scanty information, but still wrought destruction on our enemies while maintaining a code that kept us from being savages. That's who we were. I need you vigilant, Bell, said the major. Keep the predator on sight in case those fighters return. Stay sharp. Scan the area. She patted his soldier, and he shuddered at her touch. Jones, keep working Hamid's medevac. Let me know if there are any issues. But the fighters didn't return, and the second helicopter made it back safely too. We had killed a man, but also saved a man. We saved a second man, but he was only dying because we launched a missile at him in the first place. Seemed like the kind of day that the major would be proud of, with even enough blood to please the general. But to me, it was difficult to tell if we had made a difference. I'd been looking through drone feeds too long. Everything was blurry.
Matt, I love when you read this to us. Yeah, I'm standing in line. I got my cash out. I'm ready for that audiobook. I'm ready. So,
all right, I'm going to
no pressure, my friend, but
I'm going to get to work on it.
Come on.
Thank you, Dave, for having me on today and for caring about the story and for caring about veterans generally and, the future of Canada.
When we met together for our pre-chat in the past, one thing I had written down on my paper, find your true people and go live a story, is what I had written down from our conversation in the past.
If there are any young writers out there, that is the advice that I would give them.
Yeah.
To go forth and try to live as much and as hard as you can. And maybe one day you'll be able to write about it.
Matt Jones, thank you so much for being part of this. And I'm wishing you well. I'm signed up as a new subscriber. I can't wait to see what's coming to me next. And I'm excited to see what's going to be next for you as an author as well. Keep me in mind. Come back. Give us updates so we can support you more, and to all of our veterans that are listening. Thank you for serving your country and doing the ultimate for us. For very little praise and recognition, you've done more than anyone else in our world. And Matt, you're a great example of that. Appreciate what you've done for us today and spending your time with us as well.
Thank you very much, Dave, for these extremely generous words. Thank you for having me on the show.
Excellent. Everybody, all information as always in the show notes. I'm asking you, please, when you buy this book and you buy multiple copies, to leave a great review. Let people know why this book means something to you. And the next time you see a veteran, shake their hand, thank them. And when you stand on Remembrance Day, remember all those who are serving today and who have served in the past. And make sure you show your gratitude. Matt, thank you again so much. Hey, thank you so much again for pressing play. As you've heard, great guests on the show. And one thing you didn't hear in this conversation is what? What did you not hear? Think about it for a second. That's right. Not a single solitary commercial for a mattress or a supplement or a whatever you call it. No. Why? Because we don't want to break up the conversation with commercials. So the fact that you're still here means that you are a fan of the show, I'm assuming. So if you want to help to keep the podcast going and to make me feel really happy, all I really care about is coffee, okay? I just got to be honest. I love coffee. I'm drinking one right now. It's starting to get cold. I need to warm it up. Helping us with our Buy Me a Coffee link over at livingthenextchapter.com and also in the show notes helps kind of keep the lights on around here. Remember, I'm doing this for free. I'm paying for everything. So I would love to have a little coffee donation, even $5 kind of fills up my cup. And I would love to enjoy a coffee from you. So if you're interested, again, thank you for listening. But you can use our Buy Me a Coffee link and fill up the cup. Thanks for being here.